All right, welcome everyone. We are here this evening to celebrate Susan White and her prolific writing. I don't know what number of books this is. Is it 15, 16,
Well, 14 and
14?
15 if you count the anthology, but 14 of my own.
Okay, 14 and well, I would say 15. You're in 15 books. Um, Susan would like to record. Sure, done. And we're celebrating such a winter's day. Today we have Susan and also her friend and fellow writer from New Brunswick, Martha Vowles. And I hope I pronounced that right, Martha. Okay. I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement and then I will turn it over to the writers in the room. We acknowledge that the land upon which we gather is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Epiquick, Prince Edward Island is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We pay our respects to the indigenous Mi'kmaq people who have occupied this land for over 12,000 years, past, present, and future. And I say that from the PEI perspective because that is where Acorn Press is from, and that's where I am right now, but applicable, of course, across Canada.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much. Thank you to Acorn Press for their ongoing support, and to Tracy, who's been such a support since she started working with Acorn Press and with Acorn's authors and with myself. I appreciate everything she does. I also want to thank Martha for agreeing to interview me tonight. Martha is a fellow writer from New Brunswick. She's right across the St. John River from me in Grand Bay, Westfield area. And her first book was called Senior Management, Parenting My Parents, and it won the nonfiction prize in the New Brunswick Book Awards in 2022. And Martha is an encouragement to writers and a friend, and she's just really beginning her writing career, and I appreciate her joining me tonight. Okay, Martha.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for inviting me to do this. It's an honor. And I just want to start by saying congratulations on the publication of your 14th novel. That's wonderful. That's quite an accomplishment. I loved this book right from the front cover. I think the artwork on the cover is absolutely beautiful. Um, I loved the characters. I loved, of course, being a resident of the St. John area. I recognized so much of the setting, and it just felt so comfortable to me. Um, so I want to start with, I think the first question that came to my mind was, well, first I want to say how much there was to unpack in this book. You really cover a lot of contemporary themes, homelessness, poverty, addiction, sexual identity. There's a lot. There's a lot in this book, and it's all interwoven in a really, I think, in a very skillful way. But there really is a lot to be thinking about as you read the book, but it's all done in the context of a really good story. So I want to start by asking, what was your inspiration for writing the book?
Okay, thank you, Martha. I know exactly where the seed of the idea, and I always say that that's the most exciting part of being a writer is when you can look back and see that the seed was just a tiny little seed in your mind that blossomed, and if you go with the seed analogy, that germinated and blossomed, and I worked on and tried to bring to fruition. I moved into the city for a year. I won't get into the details of that, but I moved a very different place for me. I hadn't lived in the city since I was probably 18 when I left home and got my first apartment on Duke Street. And I remember the very first day I was moving into my apartment on Princess Street, and I drove by King Square. And I saw the bandstand, and I do acknowledge this beautiful photograph. A photographer from Mississauga, Ontario, named Ian Muddo took this photograph, and I happened to stumble upon it when I was really looking for what I wanted for a cover. And he very generously sold us the cover, or sold us the photograph, and we got it for the cover, and I appreciate that. But I remember looking into King Square, and for some reason, and homelessness definitely was a factor. In 2021, when I moved into the city for the year, and it's become even more of a seems to just be more insidious, more it's a more of a problem than even then. But I remember looking into King Square. I'll try to encapsulate this quickly, and thinking about a man. I don't think I saw anybody like a man on the bench kind of thing, but thinking about the fact that when we look at people that we see maybe as being down and out, we tend to forget the life that they've lived, the backstory that they have, because we all, of course, have one. And that was the seed that I saw. I saw a homeless man in my mind in King Square on a bench near the bandstand. And that's where the story started to come, from that small seed, if that answers your question in a very wordy way.
It does. It does. Thank you. So that leads me to a question about your process as a writer. And I want you to think about this in the context of this novel, but there might be a larger context as well. Do you know at the outset of a story that you're writing how it's all going to unfold and where it's going to go?
I don't think I do. When I realized that I wanted it to be a man, an older man, the name comes, names can come from all kinds of places. And I do notice over the period of my work, when I look back, that I sometimes use names repeatedly. Not, I don't think so that every book has the same names in it or whatever. But the story, I wanted him to have a backstory, something that made him leave St. John, connection to St. John. So I just and just the timing, the time of our history, kind of when, if you got a girl pregnant in high school, you married her, kind of thing. And that was kind of how that started. But then it all just starts to cascade, and then you revisit it over and over and over, and you look at the layers, and you decide who the characters are, and decide what their impact is in the story, why they're there, and then the connection, whatever. And then the back and forth is also such a process for me. And because the backstory was so crucial to the present story, I had to be very deliberate as to how I was going to share that. And I worked on that to great lengths. I wanted it to be a very tight time period of Hank being homeless and being, and the time period, November to January, with winter coming and all the factors that impact homelessness in such a dire way. And then his backstory, over the years. And so I don't know, if that answers your question, but the process is very gradual. I guess I will say that. And then, some things come to mind and they don't work. And so you revisit them and you think, okay, how's that going to work? And how, how am I going to fit that in? Just things, incidental things like Miriam meeting Hank's daughter in the hospital. Like, I didn't know that from the start. But then as that started to come about, it became kind of crucial, and then it became so important because Miriam actually was the it was her act that actually got finally the reunion between Hank and his daughter toward the end of the book.
Right. So do you at any point, and I'm asking this, I think, because I'm from a writer's point of view, do you ever use an outline? Or at some point, do you think, I better plot this out and make sure it all hangs together?
I make notes, definitely, and go back and forth. And sometimes I'll, go back to a notes that I've made previously and realized that I didn't work that in, that it didn't find its place. But yeah, not in outlines per se. Now, I was on Hope's launch last night, and you know, we always learn as writers. We learn so much from other writers. And she says that one of her methods is that she has chapter names and then kind of fits this, you know, kind of builds the story around that. And I thought back to my second book, which is 10,000 Truths, and it had chapter names, and it's probably my only book that does. But those chapter names kind of, they came about, you know, simultaneously with the writing. But yeah, I don't outline. I often know, I don't even really often know what the end's going to be. Sometimes the end surprises me. And incidentally, and I don't want to, you know, give spoilers, but in my original manuscript, I had Hank die at the end of the book. And my editor, Penelope Jackson, who's just so amazing and wonderful, she challenged me on that. And she said, you know, you know, of course he has to die. We all die, but does he have to die at the end of the book? And I revisited that, and I'm really, really glad I did, because it brought about a reunion that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I thought that I think that reunion was important to the story, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks. I think this might be a good point for you to do a reading.
All right, I'd love to. Thank you, Martha. I'm going to read from the first two pages. I said that the current happenings in the book are dated, and it starts November 2nd, 2021. And of course, we all know that we're still in the midst of the pandemic, and that does play a part in the book as well. Hank walked slowly through King's Square. The mid-morning sun was bright, but the wind biting. The trees surrounding the bandstand were bare, the ground carpeted with the colorful foliage that had graced the square into late October. City workers had turned off the fountain, cleaned up the gardens, and removed the hanging baskets in preparation for winter. Fewer people were milling about, but the clusters of pigeons remained. A few were pecking wildly at a Tim Hortons paper bag. Hank felt for the gift card in the pocket of his parka. Someone had handed it to him several days ago as he stood on the corner in front of the CIBC bank, but he hadn't tried to use it yet. He hated the way heads turned toward him when he walked in the door. Even when he hadn't been technically homeless, it was as if he wore a sign announcing his worthlessness when he entered Tim's. He'd always had enough change to pay for whatever he ordered, but the doubt and distrust were written on the servers' faces. Sometimes the person behind the counter looked too young to be employed, and sometimes too old to still be working at a job barely paying minimum wage. Hank tried not to judge either way, but Hank felt judged by everyone around him. Strangely, this came from a feeling of not being seen by those who passed him, while at the same time feeling each stare or passing glance as a condemnation. The woman he'd helped up off the sidewalk a few minutes ago used the word invisible. Others walked by, giving the collapsed woman a wide berth, chalking up her stumble off the curb and her bleeding face to a drunken state, and not one they wished to engage with. Apparently, I'm invisible, the woman muttered as Hank helped her to her feet. I'm Pearl. Hank reached into his pocket for an unused, folded napkin and handed it to Pearl. I'm Hank. Your face is bleeding. Are you okay? They think I'm drunk. I'm not drunk, Pearl said, dabbing at her forehead. These people walk by me every day, but they don't even see me. Not a nod, or God forbid, a kind word. I watch them scurry along living their busy, important lives. Not one would have a clue where I live or anything about me. I'm just some scary old lady to them. That's if they even notice me. And I guess falling on these uneven, poorly maintained sidewalks makes ignoring me even easier. We're all drunks or drug addicts, as far as they're concerned. Hank sensed the anger in Pearl's words and recognized the underlying hurt. A few days ago, he'd stood on the sidewalk watching workers haul out all the furniture, fixtures, appliances, and discarded possessions from the rooming house on Duke Street. Everything was thrown in the dumpster as the pompous real estate agent stood smiling for the camera while handing the keys to the new owner. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
the story starts in 1958, as you've already mentioned, a very different time from what we live in now. And you go back and forth, chapter by chapter, between the 50s, you move on into the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and then right up to contemporary time. And as you say, you use that very clearly defined timeline for the contemporary part of it. Did you have to do some research? I mean, I recognize that starting it in 1958, you were a very small child at that time. It's not something that you hold in your own memory. Did you have to do a little bit of research to acquaint you with that
Yeah.
era?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have been 2 years old in 1958. And but I did a lot of research. I remember St. John from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I asked questions about St. John, did research about St. John, buildings that were there, businesses, that sort of thing. And also as I said, I knew he had to leave St. John and there was a reason to leave. And initially, I don't think I knew that he was a gay man. I wanted there to be a challenge, something that seemed to be underlying. He had a dream about the music industry and that sort of thing, but there was an underlying challenge that, and so I did a lot of research that way. Definitely like the job that he got in Los Angeles. They were building the Dodgers Stadium at the time, things like that. The job in Maine, they were putting the new interstate through and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say definitely. And I am quite careful about that. I mean, I can always, I'm sure people can find mistakes or errors in that timeline, but I do deliberately look for something that fits, and then I'm quite diligent about making sure that it's right, that I'm not totally off base, even though I think we have a little bit of writer's discretion, but I
Yeah.
am careful. And yes, a lot of research. And definitely, when he ended up, when he finally got to San Francisco and recognized, acknowledged his fact that he was homosexual, and something he had been denying for most of his life. Really did a lot of research on that era, the Harvey Milk and the area. And
Mm.
the second reading I am going to do will bring that into play a little bit. But yeah, so yes, to your question, lots of research and back and forth, finding things that work. And sometimes, okay, no, I can't do it there because it won't work there. And, and
Yeah.
just the sense of time, the sense of what the pressures were at the time as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm. Okay. Um, I really enjoyed your references to local landmarks. Like I noticed that you worked Reggie's restaurant into the story, and anyone who's from the area would certainly recognize that. Um, and I also noticed that you had some real characters, some real people from St. John, and you used their real names. And I'm just curious about that. Uh, how did you come to that decision
Yeah.
to identify some people by their actual names?
Mhm.
What did you have to do in order to get their permission to do that?
Right. That is something I've done before. A lot of my books are set here on the Kingston Peninsula where I live, and I use people's real names, and I often reach out to them or the families, and I also say that I don't use them in a way that I feel would be derogatory or land me with a lawsuit of some kind. But some of the historical figures, like Elsie Wayne and that kind of thing, to me, we have, the fact that they're public figures gives us kind of the freedom to use their name, and it was historic, certain things. I reached out to anybody that was still living, that I was using their names, in a historical way, and I guess ran it by them, asked permission. I had a couple of people that read my manuscript that I felt I owed that consideration to. I heard back, I got a lovely note back from Carl Trickey, and so those type of people that I fit in. I was careful. I think I was cautious, but I also was, to me, they belong there, like they belong, the acknowledgement, different, Judith Meinhardt, certain people that I mentioned that did work along the way, that mattered, in the whole, where we are today. So yes, I do use real people's names. A friend of mine, his father was the meat cutter in the Dominion store at King Square, and he called me after reading the book, and he was just so thrilled. He said it was just such a treat to see my dad's name there as the meat cutter at Dominion in King Square. And so, to me, I don't know, you don't have to use real people's names, but if you can, and to give them the credibility, to give them the acknowledgement for things, I don't think there's any harm in it. And I've never been, I mean, I know there's our legal areas, we have to be careful when we use like lyrics from song, for instance. I had more lyrics in there that were taken out by my editor and publisher because of legal reasons. So
Right.
there are, it's kind of a balancing act for sure.
Right. Okay, thank you. Let's see, we're coming to the end of my questions here. Some of your books have been sequels, if I'm not mistaken. I think you wrote a trilogy, correct?
Yes.
And I'm not sure if there are any others that were sequels.
No.
Okay.
10,000 Truths, Waiting for Stillwater, and Jasper's Road are a trilogy. And I do think, in the back of my mind, that there will be a fourth one. But I'm not sure. But no, most of them are standalone. I think a lot of good stories, you could continue with them. I've had people that have read The Right Retreat. I did a book club with a few women a year ago in October that loved The Right Retreat, and they were like, "You've got to write another one, and we have to find out what happens to all these characters." And and sometimes that's definitely an option. But yeah, those are the only three that I've actually done that with. So. Mm-hmm.
So that was leading me to the question of, do you think there's any potential for a sequel to this book?
I don't know. That's a good question. Like I said, Hank will have to die eventually. And
an old man.
Yeah, he's 81, and he's got the heart issues, and there's things going on. But yeah, I don't know. Certainly a possibility. But I hope, when you finish as a reader, when you finish reading a good book that's really gripped you, you can kind of see, or a movie or whatever, you can kind of see, what's going to happen with those characters in your own mind. Like, it doesn't have to be always addressed, I think, but as the reader can see, oh, that relationship between Jen and her dad now, that relationship between Ryan and Serge and Hank, like, those are such possibilities. And you hope, that's what you hope when you've finished a good story or a good movie, and think, yeah, there's a future for those relationships.
Right. Well, that brings me to my final question, and I'm sure anyone who is here tonight and anyone who has read your books and enjoyed them is curious to know what your current project is, or if you're working on anything currently.
Okay, thank you. I am working on a historical fiction that I got. It's not really too far back, but 1947, which I guess is good far back for some. But I got a research grant a couple of years ago to research the houses that were built in Moncton after the war in 1947 by the Wartime Housing Commission. But Parsons Construction in Moncton got the contract, and they built 100 houses in 66 days. And they set up, which at that time was very kind of groundbreaking, kind of almost like a modular home, which we see kind of being built these days in a lot of places, but set up a jig shop and sawmill and everything right on site, and constructed a house in a day. Like, they just constructed the houses, and anyway, I'm really enjoying doing the research on that. I'm a little bit stuck because I'm enjoying the research part, but it's not moving along as quickly as I'd like it to, but that's fine because I have before in some of my other work put things on hold and gone to something else and come back to it. And I believe that this will see the light of day, or I hope it will, but that's what I'm working on. And it is interesting. And I just need to kind of find the key to that story. And I haven't quite found it yet, but I'm hoping. But that's to answer your question. There's always something. I don't feel the pressure, oh, there's got to be a book by spring, whatever. I just find it to be such a privilege to sit down and write. So I'll be happy, when that's finished, but I love the process. So yeah, all good.
Great. Well, we have that to look forward to for
Thank you.
sure. So that brings me to the end of my questions, and I believe you have another segment that you wanted to read.
I do, and it's set in 1977. Hank felt the sweltering heat the minute he stepped out the door, but walking along the sidewalk, he felt something else, and the first person he met gave an explanation for the quiet heaviness on the normally bustling street. The bastard stabbed him 15 times. Neighbors got him into the hospital, but he didn't make it. Hank stopped to hear details of the brutal murder of Robert Hillsborough that had taken place last night only 3 streets over from where he stood. For months, he'd been trying to convince Marvin to be more cautious and less out there. He begged him to dress more conservatively, to leave his flamboyant costumes in the dressing room and not wear them boldly into the street night and day. But Marvin saw it as his mission to wear who he was proudly. Caught up in Harvey Milk's campaign, Marvin wore the button, carried the signs, and canvassed door to door, determined to make people see the injustice of the hate campaigns being waged against gay and lesbian citizens of this country. Faggot, 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 reverberated in Hank's ears as he rushed back home. After a late night show, Marvin usually slept well into the afternoon. But he had to be the one to tell Marvin about this terrible thing, not the radio, television, or some stranger on the street. He needed to be with Marvin when he heard the horrific details of an attack that hit too close to home and to the vulnerability they both lived with every day. The killer had shouted that vile word repeatedly and then screamed, "This one's for Anita Bryant." Who the hell would the next one be for? John Briggs, Jim Jones, Jerry Falwell? How could such hatred be justified? Robert had been a kind and gentle man living his life, harming no one. Robert and Jerry had gone out dancing, they said, stopped for a burger, just minding their own business, and hatred targeted them. Hatred attacked them, beat Jerry, and viciously bludgeoned Robert, leaving him for dead. Hank put his key in and turned the doorknob. Stepping into the front hall, he kicked off his shoes and headed toward the bedroom. He didn't want to startle Marvin, but he had to wake him and tell him this horrific news as gently as possible. Hank couldn't go about his business as if nothing had happened. He couldn't just go to work, sit down at the board, and move dials and knobs all day. He needed to hold Marvin, and they needed to weep together for Robert, for Jerry, and for each other. The shrill ring of the telephone stopped him just as he got to the bedroom door. He rushed back to the living room and grabbed the receiver. "Where the hell are you, Loman? Glenn Campbell's session is in 10 minutes, and we need to be set up." Glenn Campbell's session is at 10, and we need to be set up. Time is money, asshole. And that is that. 1977.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm just looking at the questions that we have in the chat. If anyone has questions, they can put them in the chat. Thank you very much for those readings. Hope asks, what are Hank's strengths and weaknesses?
Good question. Hank's strength, he was, he had a passion. He had passion for the dream, which is what led him, took him from St. John and made him, he left Tanya and left his little girl. His strength was determination, he was courageous. He worked his way across the country. He had no money basically when he left, and he worked state by state kind of across the country until he got to California, then worked it for quite a while before he had enough money to go to train to be a sound engineer. And he was also very kind, very just a very, the relationships that he develops in St. John, you can see, his how kind and empathetic he was toward others. He loved his daughter. He was so anxious to reunite with his daughter and meet his grandson. His weaknesses. That's a good question. He did have a time when alcohol was definitely a weakness. Fear was one of his weaknesses. Insecurity, that kind of insecurity that was so much a part of him as he tried, all the years he tried to hide who he was. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess the weakness, that the vulnerability that we all have, we think we're not enough, or we have to be, we have to be something that we don't always feel we are. If that answers that question.
There's also another one. Is it fun writing dialogue for characters who are so different from you?
Yes, it is. It's very fun. Yeah, and it's funny because when you look back, or when you're actually when you're reading out loud and you're thinking, that some of the characters' personality and who they are comes through in the dialogue, that is fun to write, and to try to make sure that it's not you, that you're not just, not just every character isn't just a mirror of your own self. But yeah, I liked the dialogue, like the friendships. Hank had made a friend with a young man that worked at the Imperial, and that friendship was very pivotal to the story. Gloria, who I haven't mentioned, but she was the artist that really opened up and was very, very kind to Hank. And I liked, building that dialogue. Yeah, it was great.
Peggy asks, do you have a eureka moment when you figure out what the ending will be?
Yeah, sometimes, and sometimes your editor says, let's look at that eureka moment again and see if you really need him to be dead. Anyway, yeah, sometimes, and then you work through that, and you just kind of go with, you try to go with the feeling of the story, like to try to establish that, and that's what brings upon that eureka moment where you think, yeah, I think that's what's going to happen here. Like I said, that it's really, and this has been a real learning for me, this whole, someone said, oh, you let your editor, redo make you rethink the ending of your story. I think that's so pivotal to the trust between a writer and an editor, and to see why for instance, Pearl's a character that I loved in this book. And at one point I was challenged, was she necessary? Like, did she need to be there? What did her story matter? And I felt it did, so then I worked to make her more important to the story.
Ida asks, do you have a musical background that would have placed Hank in that type of role for the technical pieces?
Yeah, no, I had to do a lot of research about that. And, like I said, there could be some more expert people that come back and challenge me on that. But I really kind of, even just the making of a vinyl record, I did a lot of research and watched videos and really kind of immersed myself in what that was, and just that whole era, when vinyl was the thing, and people are still going back often, now we're going back to it, realizing the quality of a vinyl record compared to, CDs and cassettes and whatever came after that, which put an end to Hank's career in so many ways. Music was a part of my growing up, so just the constant of music in our lives. So I do a lot of research, but yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted that, just that small connection when he would open a new record that he got from Woolworths and take it home and put it on his record player, because that's what fuels passion, is small things that lead to the direction that a person goes in.
That makes me ask, Such a Winter's Day, that's also a song title, yes?
It's from California
Right.
Dreaming on Such a Winter's Day. Like I said, I had some lyrics that we took out just for legal reasons, but the connection was there. Like that was, and as Jennifer was growing up and she would listen to the mamas and papas and, so yeah, it intertwined. The Harry Chapin thing, I have a son named Chapin, so obviously anyone that knows me knows that Harry Chapin was I'm a big Harry Chapin fan. So I wanted that connection between Liam and Hank with the Harry Chapin thing.
That's great.
Yeah.
Molly asked, I believe you were a teacher. Did you always know you were a writer, or did it sneak up on you while you taught?
I love that question. I always said I wanted to be three things when I grew up. I wanted to be a mother and a teacher and a writer. And I was blessed to be able to be all three things. I always wrote, but I didn't have the time that I have now and that I've had in the last, my first book was published in 2011. So I've been at this for a bit. And yeah, I think I always knew that I was a writer as well, and a storyteller.
Hmm. Peggy said, oh my God, OMG, vinyl records, you're telling our age.
Absolutely. I saw something on Facebook the other day. You're old if your high school had a smoking area. And I thought, oh, I'm old because Simon's High in 1973 had a smoking area. But yeah. But that is, and so many things that, that kids reading would say, oh, what was that? What was that? But it's important, I think, the whole history. I mean, you look at the trajectory of gay rights and all that sort of thing. Like, wow, I mean, things have changed over the years.
Mhm. If there are any other questions for Susan, please put them in the chat. I'm going to ask another question. What's next on your plate of
Yeah.
writing?
Okay. The book right now that I mentioned about the houses that were built post-war in 1947 in Moncton. So I'm trying to go decade by decade, which is also going to look at kind of the French English thing in Moncton, some of the historic and some of the tragedies that have happened in Moncton, CN. There's a whole lot. Anyway, I think the working title right now is If These Walls. Which is, I'm looking at one particular house that was built in that 66, one of those 100 houses that was built in 66 days, and looking at the inhabitants of that house over the decades to current, and then also bringing up the homelessness aspect of it and the, home building, because at that time they were building these houses for returning servicemen, and they were temporary. They weren't on foundations. They were just temporarily put up as quickly as they could, get people housed as quickly as they could, which is what we're trying, what we need to do currently. And then in 1952, they moved the houses into the street and put permanent foundations under them. So all those houses are still standing, still inhabited, some of them. I went and interviewed a woman whose in-laws were in the very first house. And then she lives in it and now, and she's in her 90s. So, that's what I'm working on. And it's, that longevity.
My question, Hope said, are you a fan of the Mamas and the Papas? And did you already know the history of their songs?
Definitely a fan, and listen to them as a teenager. And I remember, and I say this, my young character Liam, I mean, he's in his 30s or whatever in the story, but he's a younger character, saying that he'd been told all his life that that Mama Cass choked on a ham sandwich or whatever, and then that's not the truth of it. That's not how she died, and those things are historical, and you can look up that kind of information. But just the how their career took off, and and then how it ended, and all that kind of thing. I did research for that and knew a little bit of it, and then some of it, like I say, is just a misconception or an urban myth, and other parts of it are very true. So
Hmm. Do
Okay.
you have any upcoming appearances or markets that you're going to be at?
Well, I'm going to do an in-person launch. You know, I always get so nervous. And the day of these things, I'm always like, why did I say I would do this? Like, why am I putting myself through this? And then my husband reminds me, you did it because you published a book and blah, blah, blah. And people went. And so, yeah, I'm going to have an in-person launch at our local Legion next Thursday night. And then also Saturday I'm going to go tomorrow if the snow doesn't amount to too much. I'm going to go to Halifax to Dartmouth, and there's a Lucy Maud Montgomery's 150th birthday party at the Dartmouth Book Exchange. So Hope is going to join me there, and also one of the other authors, Mira, I think, from that wrote short stories for the anthology. And then Christmas, I'm going to take it easy. I'm at the market all through the season, but the market's closed for now. So
Nice.
yeah.
One last question. Are there common themes in your books?
I'd say definitely. A lot of my books deal with loss, with family dynamics, choices, steer you in one direction, and then you have to, kind of come to terms with it. Definitely family, vulnerability, human condition, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I see Ida says, well done, Martha. Thank you so much, Martha. I knew you'd embrace this. Martha goes at anything with lots of enthusiasm and professionalism. Oh, she's got a kitty on her lap, but no dogs. Is there? Oh, there's a dog behind her.
I noticed
The dogs are listening in, and Arthur wanted to be on the screen. So this is Arthur.
Yeah, that's great. Oh yeah, and Hope says
It was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to do this, Susan.
Thank you for doing it. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Hope says, look forward to chatting with you this weekend at the Memory Party. That's excellent. Martha, do you want to do a shout out to your books? Say some of your titles or something?
Well, so far there's only one.
Okay.
There's another one well in the works, but the one that Susan alluded to earlier is this one, Senior Management, Parenting My Parents. It's a memoir. I have written some short fiction, but primarily I write memoir. And this is the story of my overseeing the care of my dad and stepmother as they both simultaneously slipped into dementia. And I can assure everyone, if you're interested in getting this book, it's not depressing. There's a lot of humor in it.
Yes, there is.
There are some, it's, I think, a good story, and a story that a lot of people in our demographic will be able to relate to. And it is available in most bookstores and available through Amazon.ca as well. But I encourage you to support your local bookstores.
Absolutely.
It is good. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Susan?
No, just thank you for everyone that's come in. A good friend of ours, Ida Lenahan Young from the Rock. She's over in Newfoundland, and we've been on writing retreats with her, and it's nice to see her. We went to visit her this summer, where I was supposed to have a writing event, but then the weather impacted that and changed that plan. But we're hoping next year to go. And so all good. I'm very thankful I'm thankful for the internet. I remember doing my first Zoom launch and thinking, oh, this is so foreign. And, it is pretty standard now. And also, you can just shut the internet down, shut the computer down and go put your pajamas on. You don't have to get in the car. But
okay, I think that's our official ending of the evening. All right. Have a great one.
Thank you, Tracy. And thanks, everybody.